Bacon Hair spawned into a fresh Roblox world with absolutely nothing except the default outfit, an empty inventory, and the type of confidence that usually leads to terrible decisions. Most players would spend the first few minutes gathering resources, finding shelter, or trying not to get eliminated before sunset. Bacon Hair looked across an endless empty field, spotted a single wandering villager, and immediately decided he was going to build the biggest city the server had ever seen. Not 10 villagers, not 100, 1,000. If that sounds like an unreasonable goal, that's because it was. The funny part is that he didn't even have enough wood to build a proper door yet, but somehow the plan already involved thousands of citizens, massive walls, giant farms, marketplaces, towers, and enough infrastructure to rival an entire kingdom. That's the kind of confidence that either creates history or creates a spectacular disaster. There wasn't much room in between. The first day looked almost peaceful. Bacon chopped trees, collected stone, gathered food, and built a tiny wooden house for the first villager. It barely qualified as a home. It looked more like someone folded a wooden box around a bed and called it architecture. The villager didn't seem to mind. He happily walked inside, made the usual villager noises, and officially became citizen number 1. Looking back, that tiny hut was probably the most relaxing building Bacon Hair would construct for the rest of the challenge, because every single structure after that multiplied the amount of work ahead of him. 1 house became 2, 2 became 5, 5 became 10. Every new villager demanded another home, another job, another food source, and another reason not to wander directly into danger. Suddenly, Bacon Hair wasn't playing survival anymore. He had accidentally become the mayor of a city that barely existed. The first major problem appeared almost immediately. Villagers are amazing at one thing, and that thing is creating problems without even trying. One wandered halfway across the map because he saw a random workstation. Another got trapped behind a fence despite the opening being 2 blocks away. One somehow refused to leave the farm and spent an entire day pacing back and forth between 2 crops like he was conducting an agricultural inspection. Bacon Hair quickly realized building houses wasn't the difficult part. Managing the people inside them was. Every few minutes, another tiny emergency popped up. Someone needed food. Someone couldn't reach their workplace. Someone somehow ended up on a roof. It felt less like managing a civilization and more like babysitting 1,000 adults who collectively shared a single brain cell. Somehow, despite all of that, the population slowly grew. 20 villagers became 50. 50 became 100. That's when the city finally started looking like something instead of a random collection of buildings. Dirt paths connected houses. Farms stretched across nearby fields. Storage buildings overflowed with supplies. Smoke drifted from blacksmith workshops. There was movement everywhere. The empty field Bacon Hair had spawned into was slowly disappearing beneath an actual settlement. With 100 villagers came a completely different problem: space. Suddenly everything felt cramped. Houses were squeezed together. Farms were running out of room. Roads looked like someone drew them while blindfolded. Bacon Hair had 2 choices: expand randomly and create complete chaos, or tear everything apart and rebuild the city properly. Most players would have taken the easy option. Bacon Hair grabbed his tools and demolished huge sections of the settlement he'd spent hours building. It looked painful. Entire neighborhoods disappeared overnight. Villagers stood around confused while their homes vanished block by block. But once the rebuilding started, everything clicked into place. Wide roads stretched across the landscape. Residential districts separated from industrial areas. Farms expanded outside the city walls. Marketplaces sat at the center where everyone could reach them. Suddenly, the city made sense. Every building had a purpose. Every road connected somewhere useful. The entire place looked planned instead of accidental. Of course, the game noticed things were going a little too well. Night arrived, and so did the monsters. Zombies wandered toward the city. Hostile creatures climbed over hills. Raiders spotted the growing settlement and decided today looked like a great day to ruin someone's hard work. Bacon Hair immediately abandoned construction and grabbed his weapons. The peaceful builder disappeared. A full-time defender took over. He sprinted across walls fighting enemies, while villagers casually continued harvesting crops like nothing unusual was happening. One blacksmith kept working while monsters chased people through nearby streets. A farmer calmly watered crops while arrows flew overhead. The villagers had absolutely zero survival instincts, which somehow forced Bacon Hair to develop enough instincts for everyone. Every attack became a rescue mission. Every rescue became another construction project, because damaged walls always needed repairs. The city survived, but only because Bacon Hair refused to stop moving. As more attacks came, the defenses evolved. Simple wooden fences became enormous stone walls. Watchtowers appeared on every corner. Guard posts overlooked every entrance. Gates controlled traffic. Defensive trenches surrounded weak points. The city slowly transformed from a peaceful farming settlement into something that looked capable of surviving a siege. It needed to. The larger the population became, the bigger the target, painted across the map. By the time the city reached 200 villagers, protecting everyone became a full-time responsibility. Losing one building no longer meant rebuilding one structure. It disrupted food production, worker assignments, transportation routes, and housing. Every mistake rippled across the city. Bacon Hair wasn't thinking minutes ahead anymore. He was planning hours into the future. The farms became enormous. Wheat fields stretched toward the horizon. Animal pens filled with livestock. Windmills turned above golden crops. Warehouses stacked resources higher than the rooftops. Feeding 200 villagers already required ridiculous amounts of planning. Feeding 1,000 sounded impossible. Bacon Hare responded the only way he knew how. He built more farms, then more storage, then more roads connecting everything together. Eventually, the farming district became almost as large as the residential area. Watching hundreds of villagers work together across massive fields felt strangely satisfying. Every harvest represented another step toward the impossible goal. The city continued expanding in every direction. Stone houses replaced wooden cabins. Decorative fountains appeared in public squares. Bridges crossed rivers. Lanterns illuminated roads after dark. Parks filled empty spaces between neighborhoods. Bacon Hare even planted rows of trees simply because the city looked nicer with them. None of those decorations increased the villager count, but they made the place feel alive. It stopped looking like someone speed-ran construction. It started looking like somewhere people would genuinely choose to live. That small difference completely changed the atmosphere. Even the villagers seemed more active as they wandered through markets, crossed bridges, and gathered around public spaces. 300 villagers became 400 before Bacon Hare even noticed. At this point, the server looked completely different from where it started. The original spawn point was buried beneath streets and buildings. The first tiny hut still stood near the center of town as a reminder of how everything began. Compared to the surrounding structures, it looked hilariously small. Towering stone buildings surrounded the little wooden house like skyscrapers around a tiny cabin. Bacon Hare refused to remove it. That first home represented the beginning of everything. Then the city reached 500 villagers. Halfway there. It sounded impressive until Bacon Hare realized he still needed another 500. The scale of the challenge suddenly hit harder than ever before. Building another 500 homes wasn't difficult because he knew how to do it. Building another 500 while maintaining food supplies, defenses, workplaces, storage, transportation, and city organization was something completely different. Every expansion created more problems than progress. Roads became crowded, markets overflowed, workers traveled farther between buildings, storage warehouses filled faster than they emptied. It felt like solving one puzzle only for 3 new puzzles to appear immediately afterward. Luckily, the city reached the point where villagers started carrying much of the workload themselves. Farmers produced enough food to support rapid growth. Builders completed projects faster. Blacksmiths kept equipment ready. Workers transported materials across districts. Bacon Hare still directed everything, but the civilization finally behaved like an actual civilization, instead of one exhausted player doing the work of 1,000 people. Watching hundreds of NPCs work together almost felt rewarding enough to justify the endless hours spent building the place. 600 villagers. 700. 800. Each milestone passed with another expansion. Entire new neighborhoods appeared beyond the walls. Towers overlooked forests. Massive gates welcomed travelers. Markets became crowded with activity. From above, the city stretched farther than the camera could comfortably capture. Every direction showed rooftops, farms, roads, and people moving between them. The frame rate wasn't exactly celebrating the achievement, but the city certainly was. The funniest part was that the villagers never became any smarter. One still managed to stand inside a fountain for several minutes. Another somehow climbed onto a rooftop and refused to come down. Groups randomly gathered around empty intersections as though invisible concerts were taking place. Bacon Hare had completely accepted their strange behavior by this point. Trying to understand NPC logic would probably require another 1,000 villagers and an entirely different challenge. 900 villagers finally arrived. The finish line stood within sight. Strangely enough, those last 100 felt slower than the previous 900 combined. Every new citizen demanded careful planning because the city had become incredibly dense. Expanding carelessly would ruin everything Bacon Hare spent hours organizing. Every road mattered. Every house placement mattered. Every workplace mattered. There wasn't room for lazy decisions anymore. Then, after countless construction projects, endless resource runs, dozens of monster attacks, and enough farming to feed an entire continent, the final villager walked through the city gates. Number 1,000. No giant celebration. No dramatic music. Just another villager joining the crowd without realizing he'd completed one of the largest projects the server had ever seen. Bacon Hare climbed onto the tallest tower overlooking the settlement and finally stopped moving. Below him stretched an enormous city filled with 1,000 villagers living their daily lives. Smoke rose from chimneys, farmers harvested crops, guards patrolled walls, merchants filled markets, children ran through streets, windmills turned slowly in the distance, rivers flowed beneath stone bridges. Every single piece of the city existed because Bacon Hare refused to give up when the challenge looked impossible. The craziest part wasn't reaching 1,000 villagers. It was remembering how everything started. One empty field, one lonely villager, one tiny wooden house. Looking across the finished city, it almost felt impossible that the entire civilization grew from something so small. Hours of work transformed nothing into something massive enough to feel alive. Every road told part of the story. Every building represented another obstacle overcome. Every villager walking through those streets existed because Bacon Hare kept choosing to build one more house, plant one more field, place one more block, and solve one more problem. By the end, the city didn't feel like a challenge anymore. It felt like proof that even the most ridiculous idea in Roblox sometimes becomes the most unforgettable adventure if you're stubborn enough to finish it.